Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. Today we're diving into February 16th, a date so historically overloaded, it feels like the universe decided to drop every major geopolitical, scientific, cultural, and occasionally ridiculous event onto one square of the calendar. It's as if February 16th walked up to the rest of the year and said, "Hey, hold my beer. I'm building civilization today." Segment 1, Rise and Fall of Empires and Statehood. If February 16th has a personality, it's statehood with anger issues. We begin in 1620 with the birth of Frederick William, the great elector, the man who looked at a war-ravaged Brandenburg and said, "Okay, let's stop being the soggy cardboard of Europe." He builds a standing army, centralizes everything, crushes local nobles, and invents the Prussian vibe, discipline, order, and the feeling that someone somewhere is judging your posture. Fast forward to 1918, where Lithuania looks around at the wreckage of World War I and says, "You know what? Independence sounds fun." They declare sovereignty, only to be promptly passed back and forth between imperial powers like a political frisbee. And yet, that declaration becomes the blueprint for their eventual 1990 independence. Talk about playing the long game. Then we hop to 1938, Austria. Kurt von Schuschnigg, whose name sounds like a sneeze you apologize for, lets a Nazi official join his cabinet under Hitler's bullying. This is political contamination at its finest. You don't stop the fox from entering the henhouse, you hand it a name badge. Weeks later, Anschluss. Democracy speed ran into a brick wall. And finally, 1949. Israel forms its first Knesset and elects Chaim Weizmann as president. They build a system where the entire country votes as one district, ensuring every political faction, from major parties to people who enjoy citrus, hypothetically, gets representation. It's democracy on hard mode. Coalitions forever, simplicity never. February 16th, where statehood is born, reshaped, destroyed, revived, and occasionally bullied into submission. Segment 2, Revolutions, Autocrats, and Dissidents. Starting in 1959, with Fidel Castro officially becoming premier of Cuba. One day, Cuba is run by Batista. The next, it's run by a man who can do a 5-hour speech without water. Castro nationalizes everything, bans dissent, and turns Cuba into the geopolitical equivalent of a middle finger aimed at Washington. Then, 1985, Hezbollah is formally founded. This is the moment asymmetrical warfare goes from guerrilla group to permanent fixture of Middle Eastern politics. Suddenly, geopolitics looks less like states with borders and more like extremely armed group chats with ideological bylaws. And speaking of authoritarian vibes, February 16th marks the birth of Kim Jong-il. Officially at a sacred mountain with rainbows, unofficially at a Soviet military camp with the heating out. His legacy includes famine, nuclear brinkmanship, and creating a state mythology so intense it could power its own theme park if electricity were allowed. But history balances itself, because February 16th is also the date Alexei Navalny dies in a Russian penal colony. Navalny spent years exposing corruption, surviving poisoning, returning to Russia despite every warning, and becoming a symbol of resistance so strong the state needed an Arctic prison to contain him. Kim Jong-il enters the world, Navalny leaves it. The timeline of autocracy draws a full, grim circle. Segment 3, War, Justice, and the Battlefield. Now we move to the part of history where everyone is fighting, yelling, or prosecuting someone who used to be doing the fighting and yelling. First up, 1815. The U.S. Senate ratifies the Treaty of Ghent, ending the War of 1812. Unfortunately, no one had the bandwidth or Wi-Fi to tell the troops. Ships kept fighting. Soldiers kept shooting. The war becomes the historical equivalent of hitting end call on Zoom, but still hearing each other talk. Then, 1945, the Battle of Corregidor. American paratroopers literally drop onto a fortified island like they misread the instructions for extreme parachuting. The Japanese defenders are entrenched in tunnels. Combat becomes a combination of explosions, cliffs, close quarters chaos, and the kind of military improvisation that proves logistics sometimes consists of jump out and hope. Finally, the Demjanjuk trial of 1987. Israel believes he's Treblinka's Ivan the Terrible. New evidence clears him of that identity. But decades later, Germany convicts him for being a Sobibor guard. February 16th becomes a reminder that history is patient, documentation is forever, and war crimes have the worst return policy imaginable. Segment 4. Strategy, diplomacy, and planetary consequences. If the previous segment was about fighting, this segment is about thinking really hard about fighting. George F. Kennan is born on February 16, 1904, and immediately begins shaping the U.S. foreign policy personality. His long telegram basically psychoanalyzes the Soviet Union: insecure, ambitious, allergic to compromise, and extremely responsive to strength. He invents containment, the geopolitical version of don't poke the bear, but also don't let it roam into your yard. Then we jump to Boutros Ghali, who dies on this date in 2016. He leads the UN during the post-Cold War era, where everyone hoped peacekeeping would work and then found out it doesn't if nobody with power is actually invested in peace. Rwanda, Bosnia, Somalia. Conflicts too complex for a blue helmet, too ignored by global powers, and too devastating to forget. And then, 2005. The Kyoto Protocol finally enters into force. It's the world's first attempt to tell greenhouse gases, hey, maybe calm down. But major emitters aren't bound. America refuses to ratify. Developing nations get exemptions, and suddenly, climate diplomacy becomes a giant group project where half the people don't show up and the other half deny the project exists. Still, Kyoto marks the beginning of the global climate governance era. Proof that at least we're arguing about emissions instead of pretending the sky is fine. February 16th. Building foreign policy frameworks, breaking international systems, and trying to save the planet. No pressure. Segment 5. Science, society, infrastructure, and culture. Finally, the segment where humanity invents things, discovers things, organizes things, and occasionally ends things all before dessert. In 1937, Wallace Carruthers patents nylon, the synthetic fiber that replaces silk, transforms manufacturing, parachutes thousands of soldiers, and becomes the gateway drug to the entire plastics industry. Carruthers tragically dies months later, proving that genius and anguish often share the same lab bench. In 1968, the first 911 call is placed in Haleyville, Alabama, using a rotary phone and a whole lot of hope. Before this, emergency numbers were basically call someone and pray they pick up. This single standardization eventually becomes the backbone of emergency response, saving millions of lives and creating the most famous 3 digits in American history. Go back further to 1852, when the Studebaker brothers open a small blacksmith shop. This tiny business somehow becomes a wagon empire, then a car manufacturer, then a cultural icon. Their evolution is the Rust Belt's original glow-up. On the biological side, Ernst Haeckel is born in 1834 and proceeds to revolutionize evolutionary biology, coin dozens of scientific terms, produce wildly artistic organism drawings, and publish theories ranging from brilliant to, okay, Ernst, calm down. But his impact? Immense. Then, 1923. Howard Carter opens the burial chamber of Tutankhamun, unleashing global Egyptomania, inspiring Art Deco design, and reminding the world that archaeology can be both a science and a glamour industry. And culturally, February 16th gives us Katharine Cornell redefining American theater, Edgar Bergen reinventing ventriloquism on the radio, John McEnroe bringing psychological warfare to tennis, and The Weeknd reshaping modern pop with existential dread and falsetto. February 16th isn't just a date. It's an entire anthology of human creativity, failure, discovery, and reinvention. In conclusion, February 16th is a microcosm of global civilization. New nations rise while others crumble. Revolutions ignite while dissidents fall. Wars end while justice keeps grinding forward. Diplomacy reshapes borders and the planet itself. And science rewires how humans live, connect, and understand the past. This date holds everything. The birth of armies, the rise of communism, the fall of autocrats, the preservation of ancient kings, the stitching of parachutes, the dialing of emergency calls, and the music that fills stadiums. If one date can contain the DNA of human history, February 16th might just be it.